All right, welcome back. It's COMP391 Intro to Game and Simulation, and it's week 7, lesson 7, part 1. And again, we're going to do similar to what we did last week in terms of doing Blender hour, 2 hours. And then Friday, we're going to do some a little bit of theory, but mostly I want to see what you guys got in terms of your review. And so I can give you some feedback on that as well, and then get some marking done for you guys. So last time we got together, for Blender Hour, we kind of talked about how to use logic bricks, and I think you were away.
I was, yeah.
Which is good. It's a good chance for us to review what we've done from last week, right? So when I say logic bricks, you have an object like this, right? And so let's bring up Blender for yourself as well, so you can see what I'm talking about. In your object, again, I've got the ability to zoom in here. So here I am zooming in, right, to my object. One thing I want to do is I want to add some material. And again, what's the difference between material and texture? Do you know?
I don't know the technical explanation for that. No. Sorry, I wanted to.
Go ahead. So material, what it does is it coats. I like to think of it like this. I kind of produce a layer that we can modify, right, on top of your or on your object. Now, the layer could affect the entire object. The layers, there could be different layers on your object that, or you know, for example, in terms of faces or edges or whatever, they can have that. That can have a material applied, right? So it's almost like a coating, if you will. That's why I like to look at it, right? It could be as deep as a face. It could be several, you know, a bunch of, you know, all kinds of depth in there. Whatever the material is that's on there, you can use different shading. So you can, these are modifiers. You can start modifying your faces, mostly faces, edges, and vertices according to, and from a shading perspective, according to the material type. It's almost like I produce a layer, and now that I've kind of coated the face with material, I can do stuff to it. I can add shading, I can add color, I can add specularity, I can add, you know, all kinds of other stuff. So that's the material. Texture is a whole different thing. Texture can be, there's two different kinds of textures. One that's generated pretty much, right? And the other one that's loaded in. Where we load up an image map and we use that as a texture. And we call it texture because it can look like an image texture, so to give it actually the illusion of depth when we add things like normal maps and all that stuff. So that's what texture is. So there's two different things. You really need to have a material to have the texture applied, right? There is a default material that comes with every object. So, for example, the cube. If I click on the material icon, it comes with this default material. If I want to get rid of it, I can just click, you know, the minus button, and then it goes away. Now there's no material on this thing, right? This is bad because if I have no material on an object, again, it'll give me default shading and all that kind of stuff. Let's go back into game for a second. I'm going to Blender game. I'm going to hit the N key to bring up the numeric properties panel, right? And if you notice right now, my cube is 2 Blender units wide by 2 Blender units tall by 2 Blender units deep, or whatever, right? So it's actually wide is X, Y would be deep, and Z would be high. So that's right. So if I want to drop this down, I can always scale the whole cube. So S for scale in all dimensions, and if I go 0.5, and it drops down to 1 Blender unit. So it's like a 1 by 1 now. And if I actually look at my my grid, which is just a helpful little thing to help us, it looks almost exactly like one Blender unit. You can actually numerically position everything the way you want. So if you look up here where it says location, in your transform section of your numeric pad up here, you can transform this thing. So if I say I want it exactly -1 unit, and if I say I want it exactly -1 this way, and let's say we'll go 1 up, and as you can see, that's exactly, you know, where we're going, 1 by 1 by 1. Kind of a neat thing. And it's going to go by the center of the object. That's one thing you also have to know. So take a look. So when we say this location is affected by where the center of the object is. Right now my object center, it's centered on its geometry. So it's dead center in the geometry of the object. Okay. Just, again, review of objects and stuff like that. We've done this before. But just to talk about where this thing is centered. If I want to put this object back to the middle, right, I can press Shift S and I can say selection to cursor. Right now my cursor is in the middle. It'll pop into the middle, exact middle of my screen, right, even if I've moved it around. And if you notice, my location becomes 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay. If I want to change my centering, so my focal point, if you will, where my object, my origin is for my object, and the origin is where the object rotates, where it moves, the way we measure it, the whole thing, right? If I change my origin of my object, let's say the bottom left-hand corner of the cube, how do I do that? Well, I know then, first of all, it's helpful to go into orthographic mode. So I'm going to go into top mode. I'm going to go into ortho mode. And if you notice right now, you can see that it's dead center in the middle of the object. For me to measure it properly, I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see it as well. And for me to measure this properly, what I want to do is I want to move this up 1 blender unit. So I'm going to go in my Y direction. I'm going to go positive Y. If I go positive Y 1, let's go back. I meant, and if this is that was rotation, let's go to location. Positive Y 1, it moves it up 1, it jumps it up. But you see, it jumps this up 1, right? And that's not really what I wanted. If I move up positive Y from a location perspective, 0.5, now it moves it up so that the bottom of my cube, right, is hovering on my x-axis, which is good, right? Okay, now I want to move it half a blender unit to the right. So let's watch. So I'll go, my x-axis will go 0.5 to the right. So now so now my cursor is at the bottom left-hand corner, right? And but still my origin for the object is in the middle. So in order for me to set my origin to the bottom left-hand corner, I'm going to go set origin to 3D cursor on the left here, or Shift Control Alt C. It's a big long shortcut. When I do that, now if you notice, on the bottom left-hand corner, take a look, right? The left edge of my object is where the origin for my object is. Well, that's good for partly, but I want it to go to the bottom left-hand, right, this vertex right here. That's where I want it to kind of go in. In order for me to get that, right, I'm gonna transform it again. So I don't just want it in the middle of these two faces. I want it right here in the bottom in this vertex. And to be exact, accurate, I'm going to go to front mode. There's my front mode, and I'm going to pop this up half a blender unit in the Z direction up. So 0.5. It moves up to half a blender unit, right? And now again, you see my origin is up here and the cursor is down here. And what I want to do is I want to get set origin to cursor. So I'm going to go set origin to 3D cursor again. And now, yes, indeed, on one vertex, I've got my blender unit. And now anytime I move it, if I move it up from there, here, if you notice my location now is 0, 0, 0. I'm going to go back into perspective mode. Right, my location is 0, 0, 0, right on the corner. Now this is good from a positioning perspective, bad from a rotation. Otherwise, it'll rotate right around this point, right, which is bad, and it'll rotate right only around this particular vertex. All right, but it's great if you want to locate objects exactly in three-dimensional space by blender units. As an example, this is a nice way to do. You don't have to do half units this way. So let's say I want to move it up now half a unit. And I'm doing this for a reason, because I got to explain numeric transform a little bit more for you guys. That's part of what I want to do today. So let's say I want to go 1 unit up now. If I go 1 up, right, it moves up. There it is, 1 up. And if I want to go, I'm going to zoom out here so you can see that that's exactly 1 unit up. And if I want to go 1 up, you know, kind of back towards the or forward across the y-axis, as an example, I can just go y, put 1, put exactly 1 unit up. And if I want to go right 1, 1, 1, 1, right, and that's 1 across. So then, as you can see from if I go to the top view, it's exactly here where it should be. So it went 1 up, 1 across, and it always uses this bottom left-hand corner to deliver that exactness. Now this sometimes, if you want to do any kind of architectural drawing or anything else with Blender, it helps to kind of align your blocks in the corner, right, as opposed to in the middle. If I go, now I'm aligned properly now. If I want to go back to the way it was before, I can always go set origin to geometry, and it'll pop me back into the middle of my origin. So I can always do that. The other way to do that in different ways, you also have control of where the three-dimensional cursor goes. So here's my 3D cursor. Right now it's at 0, 0, 0, and that's the global 0, 0, 0, right? I can always pop that into exactly what I want. So let's say, for example, I want to match up where this is. I can always go with my cursor. Instead of me clicking my cursor, I can always go 1, watch, 1, 1 to move my cursor exactly back there, and then I can just go back, set origin to 3D cursor. So I can always move my origin around. And it's useful for us to do that from a modeling perspective because it's going to rotate around that origin. Whenever we do something, if I rotate my object now, like if I rotate it around here, and again, an example of that would be if I can rotate it numerically by just pressing rotate. So I want to rotate around my z-axis. And if I go negative, that's the one thing that's kind of weird. It goes to the right, right? If I go positive, it goes to the left. Why is that? Well, because, again, what we're talking about here is video game transformations, not transformations the way we normally use them. And as an example to that, if I was going to draw things out, these are the two axes. So let's go into another drawing program so I can show you what I'm talking about here. Just for our purposes, we have to understand rotation as we get more into game stuff and physics a little bit. And we're going to cover this because when you guys do 305, right? When you guys do COMP 305, I want you to already have a nice basis for understanding basic physics, a little bit of video game making stuff that you need to get to know. And that's what this whole idea with Blender is to give you an intro into how we make games. It doesn't matter whether you make games three-dimensionally or you make games two-dimensionally. It's very important. So I'm just going to open up a new canvas here in Fireworks. And I'm going to use my trusty little pad here. So here's my pad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to, no, not that. Instead of circle, I'm going to go to rectangle tool. And let's draw a rectangle. So that's what I'm talking about here. So here's my rectangle. I've got, let's say, this block, right? And I want to rotate it. Well, one thing you need to know is you need to know the center of rotation. So if I was going to just draw another object here, let's draw an ellipse. And we're going to just draw an ellipse. The center of rotation will be there. We're going to change the color of that to a different color so you see that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that object now by going to my selection tool here. And I'm going to move this object right where I want it. So let's say this area here is the center of selection. I'm also going to scale this down a little bit so that way you can see what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to use my scale tool. And my scale tool, there it is, finally. That was a bit of a delay. And I'm going to use my shift key here just to, transform this thing so that it just shows my point a little bit smaller. So it kind of matches what I want to do with it. So I'm going to use my pointer tool here for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm using this object to demonstrate where my center of rotation is. So here's my center of rotation. That's what I'm doing with Blender. I'm trying to set the rotation. Let's just change the color so it's a little brighter. I'll make it so it's red, right? So you can see the center of rotation. So this is where the rotation. So if I was going to rotate this shape, this is the center of rotation. That means it would kind of come across this center point as an axis, right? Well, when we rotate objects, and this is something we have to know, my battery tablet is low. Okay, well, it's okay. Let it be low. If it dies, it dies. I'm just going to draw a little bit freehand now, right? So I'm going to go with my pen tool. Actually, my pencil tool would be even better. Let's go with my pencil tool. So when I rotate, I have a couple of points. In video games, traditionally, this from a two-dimensional perspective, take a look. This up here, right? Let's try that again. This up here would be north. This is north, right? I'm drawing this here so that way when I record the video, you guys have my drawing instead of putting it on the board. This would be south. So this is south, right? This is east, and there's a reason for why I'm showing you all this stuff, because you won't understand if I don't do this. East, and this is obviously west. So here's my west. So if that's true, I always start by default in the easterly direction whenever I do my stuff. And hopefully you guys can see this stuff. Not so bad, right? So here's my easterly direction. I always start there. And my positive rotation always goes this direction first. That's my positive rotation. So when I go positive, if I go positive percent or positive degrees as an example, it's going to go this way. This kind of turn always ends up being a negative rotation, a negative degrees, a negative angle. Okay? Just to let you guys know that. So the angle starts, as an example, we're right here. In this particular case, the angle starts there. That's my center. Right? But that's the way it works. And it works like this for most video games. Sometimes the centering, wherever this thing is centered, sometimes it goes the other way. And the rotation happens in degrees, radians for most games, most game systems. In Blender, we can choose the units. We can choose if it's radians, if it's degrees, or whatever. But for most times, from a programming perspective, it's radians, degrees, radians. So if you don't remember degree radians from, high school, a different unit of measure for measuring angles. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of give you that. I'm going to close this off now. That's all I wanted to do with this thing, because I want to get back to Blender. So I'm just going to close this off and close Fireworks. And we can also close off my little tablet. Tablet's really cool. From a drawing perspective, and I was just using a Wacom bamboo tablet for that. It gives you a little bit more control when we're doing a little bit of drawing, especially when it comes to manipulating, pixel drawings and so on. If you want to draw freehand, and even if you want to do mock-ups, a lot of times a tablet is ultra helpful in kind of putting together something really quickly by hand. If you're an artist, it's super awesome, right? So going back to this example in Blender now, if you notice, we show a rotation of 24 degrees across my axis, my center point here, right? And what's really happened is that I've rotated to the left, right? And if I keep doing that, if I go positive rotation, this is exactly what I was showing you. It's going to rotate to the left because east is over here, right? And this is north, considered north, right? So if I just keep rotating, it's going to keep rotating it all the way to that way. Okay, so that's an understanding of rotation. Whenever I do a rotation transformation, let's go back to 0, so I can rotate it back to normal. All right, so a bit about origins and everything else, just in case when I speed forward, I want to start talking about other things now, and when I talk about rotations, you know what I'm talking about. And I've also just kind of reviewed what's the difference between material and texture. There's a difference. Okay. But we're in Blender game, and last time we talked about logic bricks. So this is what I want to do again this time, all right? So I'm going to go back into perspective mode, right? So here's my user perspective mode, right? And I'm going to start off a new another new file, just because we can start over. Okay, so again, whenever we do video games, it's important for us to orient the camera and ourselves properly. So let's do this. Let's orient ourselves so that the camera looks at the video game or the object like this, where I have X on the bottom axis here, and my manipulator arm shows Y that's kind of pointing towards the top, right, of my plane. This is my grid. I don't have a plane yet. And this is my Z axis. My blue arrow is kind of pointing up. By the way, when we get to Unity in COMP391, the blue arrow and the green arrow are reversed. They just use different colors. Actually, they're the same colors, but they mean different things, right? In other words, like what I meant is the blue arrow, the Z-axis, is actually across where the Y-axis is, and the Y-axis is where the Z-axis is. It means the same thing, but it might be confusing to you. When we move from Blender to Unity, you might see that as a change, right? FYI. Okay, so let's take a look at this for now again. We're back into this. So I want you to orient your screen to look like this, number one. Second thing is let's add a plane like we did last time. We're going to Shift A for add, and we're going to go plane. Okay, and if you notice again, our plane is added in the middle. I'm going to scale my plane up 20 times, let's say, so it's quite large. Okay, so our plane is pretty big. That's pretty big for now. And I'm going to pull my object up. I'm going to kind of select my cube now and pull it up. Let's add some material to my object. So again, just like we did last time, my plane, here's my plane. I'm going to click that first. I'm going to go to the material button and click the material, add a new material. I'm not going to make it specular. I'm going to make it so that it's matte, right? And I'm going to go into the diffuse channel here and click on there and change the my coloration, if you will, my shading to kind of this be a green color, or maybe more of a brown color. I think maybe brown. The browns. Now to get brown, remember if you were going to match it up, there's some really cool. If you wanted to get an exact brown, and you don't know how to get brown, if you can't really quite do it this way, you can always do it numerically too. If I click on diffuse, if you notice I have RGB values here, HSV values, hue, saturation, and those kind of values, and also hexadecimal values, right? So I have different ways, not just pulling on my color wheel to get the color that I want. So if I don't know what brown is and I want to look it up, if I go hex code for brown color, right? If I wanted to do that, if I forgot what it was, then here's my brown color code, and then I choose my brown. So let's say I want it more of a chocolate brown or a saddle brown. I get my hex code right here, right? Here's I'm just pulling it down. All I did was say, what's my brown color code? And if you want to follow what I'm doing, let's say we wanted a nice sienna, then I'm going to just kind of copy these codes. It's A0522D. So I'm going to copy this stuff, go back to Blender, right? I'm going to click diffuse. I'm going to click hex and replace this hex value with what I got from the internet, which is A0522D. When I do that, it becomes this nice sienna color, right? A0522D if you want to match up what I got. All right, so that's more of a brown. All right, now I'm going to right click on my cube. First of all, there's a couple things. Actually, let me go back to my plane for a second. Two things for my plane. Let's rename everything properly in my outliner. My outliner is the top right corner of my top right panel. I'm going to change my outliner so instead of plane it says ground. So I think that's important. And I'm going to do the same thing for my cube. So here's my cube. I'm going to right click on my cube, or rename, double click on my cube, and rename this to player. So I think it's important for us to differentiate this at this point. Okay, so my player needs a material. Right now it's got a default material that comes with the cube. Let's change the player's material so it says the material is going to be called green, because that's the color I'm going to make it. And I'm going to change my diffuse color by picking it this time and going to a nice shade of green. If you want to match what I have, it's 40E740. I'm telling you these values because you can numerically transform your objects to match exactly what I have in the video, right? If you wanted to do that. Okay, so green. Let me just make sure I've my material for my ground. I forgot to name it. I should probably name this ground as well, or brown. Sorry, the color. So brown. I could also name it sienna because that's more accurate. Kind of a sienna color. That's the color that I made my ground based on my hexadecimal values that I found. It's more contextual. You want to make it as much as contextual as you want. Okay, cool. So I've got my green object, and just as a recap of what we did last time, right? Now that I've got my object, if you notice, it's kind of specular for my character. I can leave that on for now. I don't mind. My ground should be matte for now. And what I want to do is, remember we went and changed modes. Like right now, I'm in my default view up here, right? And what I want to do is change my default view from there. I want to go into game logic. So here I'm just changed to game logic. I should probably change this from Blender render to Blender game at this point if you haven't done it already. And then I've moved my view from default view to game logic. That's what this thing is. It's just a default view you can change. Now it'll look like this. Now this is cool and all, right? But game logic takes up a lot of space. And if you notice on the right hand side here, there's this big space that it has for for scripting. And we're not going to do scripting in this course just because we're going to keep it easy, right? So there's a couple things I can do. I can get rid of it, right? But before I modify it, I want to change. So I want to keep game logic just in case I want to get back here again. I want to make my own, right? So I'm going to click the plus button for my own custom view, right? And now I have game logic 1. And I'm going to rename this thing to, you know, whatever, my default view. I can call it whatever you like, my game view, right? It's my own custom view. I can always go back to game logic later. Okay. Here's the other thing I want to do. I want to get rid of this thing. So how do I do that? Well, this little slashes on the right here. If I pull this over across, it gives me this arrow that takes it away. So I have a bigger space for my game. I don't need to do any. I'm not doing any programming right at this point, so I'm just doing that. I'm also going to change my view because right now my view is set to solid. I'm going to change it to material. That's one thing I want to do. And if I click N, the N button, it still brings up this numeric transform thing. And I want to change it, make sure my shading, if I go down the shading section, I want to change my shading to GLSL because that gives me that nice type of shading that we need for game. And I'm going to get rid of it by pressing N again. So I'm going to get rid of that panel again. Okay, so there's my shading. And again, here's my lamp that kind of hangs out over my character, right? It's my player. It's kind of dark, right? And if I want to go back, I'm just going to switch views again. I'm going to go back to default view. This is what it looks like. But if I switch into material mode, this is what the actual game looks like right now. It's kind of dark. So my texture, my material, sorry, in the background is pretty dark right now. It's this sienna brown that I chose, right? So what do? There's a couple things I can do. I can add a lamp, add lamps, right, to add additional brightness to the scene, right? I could do that. But what I'm going to do is I can also change my lamp. Right now, if you notice, when I click on my lamp, I select my lamp, on the bottom right-hand corner, it shows me the type of lamp. Right now, it shows me that it's a point lamp. I can always change it to a sun, which totally brightens my view. It's crazy bright, right? Too bright. Or although I could dial down the energy level. The spot lamp, which kind of adds a spot lamp, right? A Hemi, which I really kind of like, but it's very bright right now, or an area lamp. Okay, so I think I'm going to go to a spot lamp. I like this idea for spot. But in order for me to align my spot lamp so it's on my object and it's bright enough, I want to try and lift it up a little bit. So I'm going to go into front view. Here's my front view. I'm going to lift my spot lamp up, right, and to the right. So it kind of points at my object. It's quite large right now, with an energy of 1. My distance is 30. And the reason why it looks so large is because I've converted my lamp from a point lamp to a spot lamp. I'm on the right view here. If I go, or sorry, the front view. If I go to right view, it looks like this. Here's my right view. So you can see that my object is getting illuminated from my lamp. Let's go back to here. There's my lamp way out here, right? If I want to rotate my lamp, by the way, I could do that by just pressing the R button like normal and rotate it across one axis, right? So I can rotate my lamp so it points at my object. And if I go to front view again, I can do the same thing. I can rotate my lamp so it points at my object, setting up a lamp from the side, right? If I go to top view, right, I can also see what it's going to look like. Here's my top view, actually see my plane. And I can see that it's still quite dark, right? Still pointing at my object, but quite dark. I can increase my energy level, make it like 5, right? To add a little bit of kind of effect, right? Here it is. And if I want to add another lamp, just to give it that kind of shading, I want to kind of keep it dark, not completely light, but I want to add another lamp. I can always kind of use my Shift D to duplicate my lamp. I can move it across the X-axis by pressing the X button, move it across. Right, just approximately where it's going to be, just like it is on the top view. If I go to top perspective view, this is what it looks like. So again, just right across on the other side. And now I'm going to rotate this lamp back the other way. So I'm going to go to front view. I'm going to rotate the lamp, pressing the R key, rotate it back towards my character, right? And if I go to 3 for right side, right? And if you notice my lamp is on one side, I'm going to kind of plant it on the other side. and rotate my lamp so it points at my character. And now when I look at it from the top, or if I go back to top view, I've got my lamp, but I've got two lamps. I got one down here, and one over here, and it illuminates my object in a kind of this weird way. Again, I'm showing you some lamp effects, things that you can do with it. Right. Now this is because I've changed my default lamp, and this is what it looks like. So I'm going to go back to perspective mode. I've added a couple lamps here on my plane. Maybe I also want to add another lamp just from a general lighting perspective. So again, I've got my origin my cursor at the origin. I can press Shift A and add in an additional lamp here. I'm going to make it a point lamp this time, right? And I'm going to kind of add it in with a very bright light. So make it maybe 5 to kind of give me general lighting for my entire area, but some brightness in the middle. So again, you can light your area up the way you like. Okay, I'm going to zoom back in here. So I got like 3 lamps. One which is this point lamp to give me some general shading, and I've got a couple of these other lamps here. One lamp on the side, which is a spot. Another one over here, which is a spot. And again, I've changed the energy level to get them where they are. Okay, cool. So here's my object now, and if I look at it from the top, I see that I'm in the right kind of coordinate space. I've got my right arrow, my X arrow pointing to the right. I've got my Y arrow pointing to the top of my plane, and I've got my Z arrow pointing straight toward me, which is the Z axis. I want to pull my character way down here, so when I start off my game, I want to move around the board, right? So to do that, I'm just going to take my character here, which is this guy here on the green arrow. I'm going to take the green arrow and, take my green arrow and pull him down, so he's over here. Now if you notice, there's some interesting shadows going on, right? Because I've got multiple lamps. I've got a shadow here and I've got a shadow here from these 2 lamps projecting shadows from the object. And I notice now that my character is slightly hovering above my plane. As I come closer to my plane, as an example, I get less shadowing. This is for my lamp. So I got this lamp over here, which also gives me shadows. Okay, cool. So insert effects. All right. Now when I play my game, I want to look at my game in this perspective for now, right? So we're going to change my perspective. And I showed you how to move the lamp around by selecting the camera. By selecting the camera, here's my camera. I can select my camera. I can move it around manually if I like, or I can numerically transform my camera by pressing the N button. Here's the N button. Lock camera to view. I can do that. Go into camera mode. So press the 0 button on your numeric keypad, right? Here's the camera. And then I can kind of zoom out my camera and put it in it whenever I move it around, because I've locked my camera to view. It kind of locks up where I want it, right? And I can kind of transform that view the way I like. I'm moving in and out, so I have my object. So if I want to move my object around, I can move it around from here. I can also move it back even more so you can see my plane a little better, right? So when I press P for play now, because that's how we play our game, P, right? I get this view. I'm just going to make it larger for you guys so you can see it, right? So I'm gonna deselect this lock camera to view, right? And I'm going to kind of make it larger, get rid of the N, my panel over here. So make this larger so you can see this, and also press the T button to toggle off my other side, and now you can see how big it is. Right? So that's what my view could be, and it's my camera perspective that I'm seeing, right? Remember, my camera is locked to view. So if I move things around right now, you can see my camera's way over here. Look, this is where my camera is pointing. When we go to do Unity, you're actually going to have some almost like a lattice that you're going to see, and it's going to show where your camera's pointing. It's not as easily seen in Blender. Like sometimes you can get confused where the camera is looking, and you don't actually have a view of what the camera looks like. In Unity, you have a little panel that shows you a preview of what your camera is looking at, which we're going to get to. So again, I'm going back to camera view. If I toggle off, I can toggle back to perspective view, back to camera view with my 0 button on my numeric keypad. All right, so there's my camera view, and this is the view that I want to play my game. but I want to program my game, my logic, in another view. So let's go over here again and switch views from, I made my custom view. I'm going to go back to game view, the one I made. Here it is. I see my object. I'm just going to zoom out so I can see everything. There's my game board. And this is where I want to try and define my logic here. It's actually a lot easier to do it here than it is if I was to do it in other places. I also have over here materials and all that stuff. And you know what? I want to get rid of this panel because in my view, I don't care about this. I'll do all my materials and shaping and physics and all that stuff. I'll do it in another view if I need to. So I'm just going to get rid of this and kind of make this a complete logic panel down here. Again, I'm only affecting my game view. If I ever want to get back to my other view that's back here, if I go back to game logic, it gives me back my default view. If I go back to default, it leaves me off where I left off, right? So it's important to have different views to play with when we're programming. We'll go back to game logic again. Here I am. Let's go back to my game view, which is the one I've custom made, right? Here's my game view. And I can see my cameras and everything else without being confused, right? I want to keep this on because sometimes this is important for us to know which is selected. I want to hide all my camera, so I don't mess around with it anymore, and my lights. So they're still there, the effects are still there, but I just want to hide them. So I want to kind of, this is the little eyeball here. If you notice next to these, in the outliner, next to your object, I want to kind of click away these objects. So I'm going to kind of hide my point camera, and there's a couple lamps, lamp 1 and lamp 001. I kind of hide those ones as well. I can also lock them so that I can't modify them. I'll leave them there the way they are for now. And I also want to hide my camera, so I can't touch that right now. I'm just going to move it away. So now if you notice, a nice clean view, right? If I go back to default view again, if you notice, I still have those all hidden. So whatever I do in one outliner, all the other outliners are affected as well. So if I go back to game view, which is my custom view, you notice that there's just my player and my board. Okay, let's add logic to my player like I did last time, just as a review. So now, click on my player. You can actually select them here too. If I want to select anything, I can select in my outliner. If it's too difficult to select them here, for now, we can do that with player. So I'm selecting my player, see how it turns on, right? This is good. And what I want to do here is I want to add some control here for my player. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller for my game property because I don't have a lot of game properties right now at this point. And I'm going to make these things a little bit bigger so you guys can see them. So there's 3 sections as a review. There are sensors, which are like event listeners. There are controllers, which are like conditional statements in programming. And there are actuators, which are event handlers or callback functions, right? That's what they act like. So that's what these 3 things are. And we wire them up physically. We wire them up like last time. Let's add all of our keyboard controllers back in. So I'm going to click on Add Sensor. I got my player selected to do this. I'm adding a sensor. I'm adding a keyboard sensor, right? And now if you notice this keyboard sensor panel comes up, and I can, under key where it says key, there's a little input. If I click there, I can select my A key. And my A key is hopefully I'm going to move my character to the left across the x-axis. So let's do my keyboard. I'm going to rename this thing so we know what it is. We're going to call it the A key, right? Just so that way I know what it's doing. And if you notice, put an underscore here. If I ever wanted to program this or access my sensor, I could do that now because I've named it. That's why we name everything, because it's easier from a code perspective to access it. It's the same in Unity. You want to name all your assets. You want to name all your objects so that way you can access them in code. If you don't name them properly, you can't access them. Okay, that's one. Next thing I want to add is an actuator. I'm going to go into add a motion actuator. And remember what we did last time. If I want to move my character, my player, to the left, there's a couple ways to do this. Right now, my location, I can kind of change the location of my character. We've been using that for now to left. And remember, if I go back to, I'm just going to switch views for a second. I'm going to go back to default view. I want to go back over here. There's the physics button for my player. My player is selected. I'm going to go to my physics button. And if you notice right now for physics, because we're in Blender game, that's why I have this menu. For physics, my object is static, which means static means that it's not going to move. It's not going to be affected by gravity, all right? It can still have collisions, it can still do all those things, but it can't be affected by gravity. I want my player to be affected by gravity. So there's a couple of options. There is a built-in character template, which allows simple kinematic, like it says, physics, appropriate for game characters. All right, that's what this thing does. There's also, I could also make this thing dynamic, right? Linear physics, if I wanted to make dynamic character, right? I could make this an occluder, which is basically for if I want to do different kinds of scene rendering. I could make him a sensor, right? There's different options. I could also make him a rigid body, right, which is give you some different angular physics, and also a soft body for soft body physics if I was making water or something like that, or something that's like, and I can change that. For now, let's make him character. So that makes more sense. And if you notice, he's got a step height, a jump force, a default jump force of 10. We might have to modify that later on. A fall speed maximum of 55. That's the maximum fall speed. He won't accelerate past 55 Blender units, right? And I also need to define a collision bounds. If I click collision bounds here, let's leave it at box because my character is a box right now. Makes sense. So these are all things we can modify from a physics perspective for my character. All right, let's also check if I select my ground, right? I also want this to be static. If you notice, I can also check collisions for here as well. I'm going to check collision bounds. It's still a box because it's a ground. It doesn't have any thickness, but I think box physics, by the way, is the easiest on CPU utilization, right? If you change this to something else, it becomes more complex. And we want to save that for complex things we want to have accurate collisions with. But for now, this box physics is okay, and it's a static object. Okay, cool. Let's go back to that other view. So I'm going to go click here. I'm going to go back to my custom game view. Right here it is now, and I've got some physics. If I click on my player again, now I have other options. I have simple motion, right? That's one thing I have is simple motion. I also have character motion now. That's an option. If I click character motion, it also gives me the ability to add jump. I want to use character motion instead of simple motion, right? That's what the type of actuator I want. And you can only get that if you make your object a character. Okay, now I want to take there's a little button here, if you notice, a little like circle. I want to take this and I want to drag across by click and dragging way over here to this one and connect it, almost like connecting a little wire. And what this does automatically is it adds in an automatic actuator that's an AND gate. That's what it does. So I'm going to say this one, this is how we should read it, okay, if I was going to question it. And if on an exam I ask you what this does, if I show you images and I say, when you do this, what is it? How do you read it? You should read it like this. When I click the A key, then, right, do this motion. That's what this is. That's how you do it, right? So if you notice the location, I want to move it to the left, right? Because it's negative, it'll be negative X. So I'm going to just use this negative 0.1 Blender unit. To test this, if I press the P key right here, I can literally press the A button. And if I've done it right, it's going to move my object to the left, see? Until it falls off the screen and she be gone, right? Escape gets you out of play mode, right? And back into regular object mode. Okay, cool. I want to do the same thing. By the way, my motion, I should probably name my motion as well. My motion is kind of left. I moved it to the left, or move left might be the right way to say it. Move _ left. You can also use move left, like as in camel case, upper camel case, capital M, capital L. You have to decide on a convention that you're going to use. Okay, so I'm going to kind of minimize. You can actually minimize these things so you don't have to see all the detail like this by clicking this button, this down arrow, and collapse it. I'm going to add another sensor. Let's add some more sensors. I'm going to add another keyboard sensor. It's going to be the D key. So here's my D key. Name this D _ key. And might as well add them all. So let's just do them all at once. So I'm going to go add sensor, keyboard sensor, and I'll name this thing the W key. And click this middle area here and press W. Oops, W. Yeah. And one more. I'll add another one. I'll say the keyboard sensor, and it's going to be the S key, right? S key. When I click the S key, and then S. And you know what? Let's press the space bar for my jump, right? So I'm going to go add sensor. I'm going to go keyboard. I'm going to click this key and press space. And now my space bar is my jump. So I'm going to call this space bar. Okay. So these are the keys that I've selected. Now let's add the actuators. So I'm going to add motion. And I'll say change this to character motion. I'm going to connect these two together right away, and then make so that my D key moves my character to the right. So character to the right, so positive X. And I'll do the same thing. I'll minimize this, collapse. Oh, one thing I should do is rename this thing. So instead of move left, it should say move underscore right. Again, we're just naming them. So we can also see them here on the these are called logic bricks, like we talked about before. These logic, and because really what we're doing is we're making a logic gate. Right? These wires are just saying do this and then this and then this. Okay, let's do the same thing with the W key. I'm going to add a motion actuator. It's going to be of type character motion. Right, so motion, character motion. Drag and drop this one over here. This is going to be my W key, which means I'm going to move forward. So move forward. And of course, I'm going to move up the y-axis, so it's going to be positive y. And again, in some game frameworks, positive y is actually down the screen. All right, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add another actuator, motion actuator, and we're going to make it so it's going to be called move back, move forward, move back, and it's going to be a negative value on the y-axis when I move back and I press the S key. Okay. And one more, and I'll do my another motion. It'll be, instead of simple motion, it'll be character motion. And the only thing I got to do for here is click the jump button. Take a look. There's a little jump button on character motion right here. You see it? Right here on the bottom. Jump. And then I'm going to take, whenever I press space bar, I'm going to just jump up. Use my jump values. It's already built in. I'm going to call this jump. Okay, cool. So I've got all my basic motion. If you followed what I've just done, you've got all this. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets of logic bricks, 5 rows of logic bricks, if you will, right? 5 sensors, 5 controllers, and 5 actuators. Again, A, D, the W, the S key is the standard controller, and then the space bar for jump. Let's try it out now and see what happens. So first I want to try my basic motion. So A for left, D for right, W for up, and then S for back. So those are all working. If I press jump, it does show me that it jumps even in this 2D view. Look, watch. See how the shadows change, right? So it actually works. If I want to switch views now, because I think it's better on a kind of a perspective view, let's look at perspective view and go back to my game view. Here's my game view. Sorry, my default view. Here's my default view. I'm going to press play, and let's see how it works now. Take a look. So press P for play. Again, I use my A key to move right, left, D key to move right, left and right. I use my W key to move forward and my S key to move back. And when I press my space bar, I jump and jump and jump. And I can't jump more than once. I can only jump when I'm on a platform. So if I press D and jump, I can do that. I can press, kind of move and jump, jump and move. I keep jumping if I want to too. But I have kind of basic jump functionality. If I don't like how fast I jump or how high I jump, I can modify that. Like over here in my physics. So if I look at my character physics, right now I'm using my jump force is 10. I can always change that. And my fall speed is 55, my fall speed max. One thing I also like to do is on the world view, if I click the world button, which is this one, it's kind of the fourth one in from the left. So there's the render button, and I've got this other button which is data display, the scene button, and then there's the world button. If I click the world button, I can say, well, it's bullet physics, but right now I'm falling at 9.8 meters per second, and I told you guys before that's too slow for a game. We want to change this value to like 30. Now, if I do that and I press play, though, press the jump button, I do fall a lot faster, right? Which makes more sense for game. I don't float as much with that value, let's put it that way. So that's really, really important to change my gravity to 30. That's good. From a rendering perspective also, I think it's important. Let's click on the render, the little camera button, right? And if I go to my little camera button, if you notice, there's some other options here that you can see. It shows us that we're seeing things from a stereo perspective. We can look at, there's different ways the camera is being viewed right now. Okay, so I'm just in my camera view. That's what I'm looking right now. If I extend this thing open so we can see a little bit more, there's other options, right? For example, right now I'm in GLSL mode. This is important, right? I don't want to be, if I go into a multi-texture mode, it actually is a little bit slower for gameplay. So I don't recommend that. Not that you couldn't do it, you could do it. But I'm just trying to show you the best of both worlds kind of thing. Okay, so these are kind of cool. They give us the ability to view things in different ways. That's what this button does. Let's go to the next button because we haven't really explored all of them. If I click on the next one, again, if you notice, it's not available in Game Engine. This second view, which is active data. I don't have the second button available. If I click the scene button though, right, the scene button gives me a couple of things. It allows me to change my units of measure. Example of this, if you want to get very specific and do like feet and inches and all that kind of stuff, you can see that the scene button will allow you to do that. In the scene button, I can change my, for example, my measurement to imperial. If I want to build a game level, right, as an example, and I want to use imperial units instead of blender units, right, I can do that by pressing imperial. But now everything is going to be in imperial, in feet, right? If I want to split the units up, like feet and inches, which is sometimes important from architecturally design perspective, you can just choose separate units. And now it's feet and inches. We'll get later on. If you don't care about that, want to go back to blender units, just click none. That's what this does. So that's what this does right here. Scale right now, if you notice, scale is 1. Color, they also have color management and other things in here. I think this is the most important thing. We're going to use units because if we ever do any architectural stuff, which we will, if I want to build like a level with you guys again, and I want to do to scale, right, then you want to use imperial units or metric in order for you to measure things properly. Okay, cool. Let's continue on. The next one is the world one we just covered. We may have to use this later on. We'll talk about that a little later, right? And if it says look at obstacle simulation, I can choose different kinds of obstacle simulation here. Let's leave it as is for now. There's also something called mist. What's mist? Do you guys know? Mist says, if I hover over it, there's a little tooltip that comes up and says occlude objects with the environment color as they are further away. This is good from a game perspective because you don't want to be able to see objects like a mile away, like in blender units or even in real units. If you go to imperial feet, like you literally have a mile away, it's the units a mile away, and you're going to see something like that. It's pretty darn crazy, right? How does the units affect my physics though? If I click physics now for my object, right? If you notice, it still says jump force is 10, fall speed is max 55. Doesn't really change anything there. My boundaries though change. Take a look. It says my boundaries are 2 inch and 362 thousandths of an inch, right, as a margin. So that's kind of weird, but I changed that. And when I go back to, if I click here and go to game view, right, if you notice here, if I open up my motion, if I look at motion left, it actually has still the same thing. Still has 0.1 and whatever. It doesn't change these, thank God. Imagine if you're moving like 4 inches to the left whenever you pressed your button. That's a little bit too crazy, right? You can make this faster, and I think we should. I think 0.1 blender units is pretty slow, because if I go P for play and I move to the left, that's pretty darn slow, right? So we want to kind of move that a little faster, and I can kind of pump that up a little bit more. So let's say 0.2, if I check that out, see how that's double the speed, and maybe even faster than that. So let's say 0.3, right? 0.3 is not bad. Maybe even 0.5. Let's go to 0.5 just because I'm a little bit I'm a little bit impatient for things to move. Okay, so I'm gonna go 0.5 for everything just to keep it the same. So moving it from 0.1 to 0.5. So 0.5 across the y-axis, and minus 0.5 when it comes down. And jump we're gonna keep the same, right? So now when I go back into my my default view and I press P for play, and I move right and left, I move pretty quick for a game. Like I'm a pretty quick moving object. All right, these are cool things. If also the other thing, let me keep going along this row here. So I've got that. Take a look. So I've got my world view, which we just saw, right? I also have this other thing that shows me my active data display and edit. If I click there, we're going to get into this later on, where we can add this thing to a group. As an example, I just changed my view. I did not want to do that, but it's okay. We're going to kind of zoom in here again so we can see it. I'll go back into camera view. There we are. So it actually gives me things like duplication, frames, and vertices, and so on. And other controls that allow me for my look at my locations now in feet. So almost like a numeric scale for things. I can do those things as well. I can add levels of detail if I want. We won't get into that right now. Maybe not even through this particular semester. But that's what it allows me to do. So again, feet, cool. From a measuring perspective, weird from a positioning perspective. You know, if you're not used to it, three-dimensional units in feet and inches. And remember, we're also going from the middle of the object, which is kind of weird. Let's go to this next one, which is link. This type of active data to display and edit. We can add an object constant if you want to there. We're going to leave that blank. We can also do modifiers like we've seen before. The next one is, if I hover over it, it's the type of active data to display and edit is data object data, and here I can add in different texture space and other things that we're not going to handle right now. Finally, the last one is, of course, we look at the material. We've made our set material to green, and then we have our texture button. And then, by the way, there's different texture buttons. There's the one that hovers on the material, texture by itself, and then there's another one that says the world texture, because you can add a texture to the world, which we might get into. This button here, if you're doing Blender Render or Blender Cycles, this second last button is, you can create different kinds of particle physics. If you want to do a physics simulation, which we'll probably end up doing, then you use this one here to define your particle physics in a non-game environment. And again, back to physics. If I click my world now, my ground, if I click my ground, I notice that my physics type is static, so it doesn't move. My attributes, my radius, it says is 3 feet 3 inches, 0.4, right? Kind of a little bit weird, right? Let's do a couple things here. Let's go back to, one thing I have to also point out to you. Yes? You can't, no, that's not exactly the same way. You have to trick it. We'll do particle physics a little bit. So here's my object. This is my player. If I click on material, because it has physics. If I go down, it actually talks about friction. We talked about this last time. Elasticity, which is like bounce. Damping, if I have kind of any damping. I can also add a force field of different types where it can move in different ways, right? So this is another area here. There's a physics area in the material section of my object as well. And so that it's kind of weird. I wish they all had it on under the physics button, right? So all the physics were there, like in terms of friction and elasticity and force and all that stuff. But it ties into your material. And I know why they do it. It's just sometimes a pain in the ass. Okay. If I do the same thing with the ground, if you notice my ground has friction and elasticity and damping and all that. If I want to damp my force, I can do that as well. Or I can turn, like right now, damping is 0. So it doesn't do anything. And if I hover over it, it says damping of the spring force when inside the physics distance area, right? That's what it does. Now we don't have any spring force because I'm not actually adding torque to an object. I'm not adding force. I'm not hitting an object with a hammer to give it force. I'm just changing the location. That's all it does when I do this. It's kind of a clunky movement. So if I press P for play again and I move over, it just kind of accelerates and stops. It's a very specific movement. All right. That's what that does. So I wanted to point that out because when we get into playing with this stuff for the game world, right? The character motion, for example, if I press P and press the jump, when I jump up and down, character motion is actually a little different than regular simple motion, right? So I just wanted to show you that. Okay, cool. So we've done this a bunch of times. Let's do what we talked about before. I want to add it, so I want to add my enemy. And when my enemy touches me, right, I want him to hurt me. How does he hurt me? Number one. Well, it means I have to have different properties for my player. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to go back into game view. Let's go to game view. And over here where I have my actuator, right now I'm looking at my ground. I'm going to click my player. Here's my player. On the left, if you notice, there's a section that says add game property, right? So let's add a game property. The first game property I'm going to add in, right? I'm just going to expand this a little bit so you guys can see a little bit more of this panel, right? I can name it. Right now it's called prop. That makes no sense. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see it. And by the way, you can zoom in any panel you want, right? So right now my game property says prop, and it's of type float, right? Think about a game property like a variable, right? So the game properties is where I store stuff. Okay, so sometimes also you want it you want to be able to say that the game property identifies your object a little bit from a collisions perspective. Let's check this out. Watch. So if my game property, I want to change my float to Boolean, right? And I want to change my my value. Here's my value, right? Or the name of my property to player. If I click this value right here, this checkbox, it turns it to true, right? So now it's true. And if this little I next to the property, see this little I here, right here. Take a look, guys and girls. This little I button, if I click it on, it allows me to display my player in gameplay from a debugging perspective, my property. How do I do that? Well, if I'm in Blender Game, I have another menu on the top called Game Mode. And if I click there, and if I go to Show Debug Properties, I want to click that on, right? So I want to Show Debug Properties, right? And if I start playing, if I press P for play now, take a look on the left. On the top left corner of my screen, it says player is equal to true. Player is equal to true. That's the debug property that I've turned on. Now, I don't necessarily see that, not debug property. I want to turn that off. I want to add another couple properties. Another one that's called health. Let's make capital H for health. Here's my player health. I'm going to add another one, another game property called my player score. All right, so I got score, I got health. These are just objects. From a float perspective, health I don't think it shouldn't be a float. That's like an actual a decimal value. I think it should be an integer. So let's change this to integer. And my score should also be an integer. Now remember, these are just data types, and this is going to be interpreted in Python. So I'm going to click these because Python is the back-end scripting language for Blender. I'm going to click these values on here, and now from a health perspective, I want to give my player a little bit of health. Let's give him 10 health, right? Because that's a good start. And let's start his score at 0. Now when I press play, I get some debug values here, debug properties that show my health is at 10, right on the top left corner of my screen, and my score is 0. Now, because I have these properties engaged, now I can start playing with them before I actually put any kind of other values in. Okay, cool. So that's properties for my player. Let's do some other things. We might move these around, by the way, these health and other properties. Okay, I want to add in another object. So let's do, I'm going to do, we'll go back to default view. Here's my default view. And I still have my, over here, I still have my cursor, my three-dimensional cursor in the center. I'm going to press Shift A, right? And I'm going to go Mesh. And this time I'm going to add this, I like to add our enemies as UV spheres because they can roll. Right, so I'm going to add a UV sphere, right? And I'm going to make sure that it kind of pulls out a little bit. And I'm going to bring back I'm going to toggle my UV sphere out again so you can see the object. And take a look how small it made it. I mean, actually, my UV sphere became quite small. How come? Well, because my blender units, it's not blender units anymore, it's feet and inches. That's why I've changed it. How do I go back to that? I go to scene, here's my scene, and right now it's imperial. I can go back to none, which change it back to blender units. I'm gonna just get rid of my UV sphere again. And I'm gonna add it in to show you what I'm talking about. If I add it in again, Shift A, and go to UV sphere, now it becomes regular unit. And for my scaling, on the right, it shows the scale of my object, right? My dimensions are 0.6 and 0.6. I want to make this, let's say, 1 blender unit by 1 blender unit by 1 blender unit big. I can do that. Now they're all 1 blender units. There's my sphere. If I'm not happy with that, I can always go to the size of my block, right? Let's make this really big, much bigger. There it is. There's one of my enemies, so it's like 2 blender units big. Okay, we're doing everything that we normally do with it. I'm going to go to material, right? And I'm going to add a new material for my enemy, right? I'm going to make it red. So I'm going to choose my diffuse material and make it kind of a reddish color. So red, bad, green, good, brown, neutral, ground, right? And then I'll leave some specularity on, no problem, right? I'm going to go to my physics button for my sphere, right? Because my enemy. And I want to change it from static to dynamic, right? So it can actually move around. I'm also going to change my collision bounds, activate collision bounds, right? And I'm going to change it from box physics, which is the standard, to sphere. It's a little bit more complex, but it's more accurate for what I want to do with it. I also want to put on no sleeping. This is another one I want to add in. Take a look. On the right, there's no sleeping. So basically, you know what? It's going to continue to roll and do stuff and be active. Right? There's another option here, ghost. Ghost means I can pass right through it, and you know, it won't stop me from passing through. It'll detect a collision, which I'm going to do, but it won't stop me from passing through. Sometimes you want to use ghost objects so that you can pass through with your object, whatever object you want to use, your player. And when you pass through an object, like a doorway, it won't stop you from going through it, right? But it'll collide. It'll actually show a collision. Okay? But for now, we want to make it as a not a ghost object. We can also make objects invisible. If I click invisible, it won't actually show up in game. Watch. It doesn't show up, right? It's there, but it just doesn't show up. If I make this visible again and press P again, it'll show up, right? Now it seems to float because of the type of ground we have and the type of shadows and everything else we've got going on. Right, but it's not really floating, actually, it's hitting the ground. So I put no sleeping on, that's important. And it says rotate from normal, I can do that. I can use use material force field physics settings if I wanted to, if I had force field physics. I don't have that on. So I'm leaving it as is. That's my sphere. Well, I want to call this thing something. It's not going to be sphere. I want to rename it in my outliner to enemy. Kind of did this last time. Here's enemy, so I got enemy, player, and so on. All right, so here's what I want to do. When my player hits my enemy, right? When my player hits my enemy from the side, right? My player gets hurt. Yeah? My player hits my enemy. So that means that going back to my game logic, my game view, I've got my sphere clicked on. I want to add another game property to identify my sphere to the world. So I'm going to go add game property, make it a Boolean value again, call this thing enemy, right? And then click it on, so it's going to be on, so it is an enemy. I'm just making it, creating a new variable. Now, I want you to think about these things, one more thing. From an object-oriented programming perspective, I'm going to say this lightly, right? Each object has their own properties that don't mesh around. They're not global properties that work for the entire game. Okay? They're aligned. The scope for each of the variables are in the object itself, which means this enemy Boolean variable is only available within the enemy object. Right? It's almost, think about a class. It's got an instance variable called enemy. That's a Boolean type. That's what this thing is. Right? Same thing with my player. My player has few instance variables, a player Boolean object, a health integer object, and a score integer object. But they're not available from my enemy. My enemy has no knowledge of them because they're out of scope. Okay, keep that in mind. And my ground, it's also an object, but it has no game properties right now. Okay, so when my player collides with my enemy, that's my if. When my player collides with my enemy, then I want my health to be reduced by 1. Yeah? Okay, how do we do that? Well, I've got to set up a collider. Let's do that. So here's my sensor. I'm just going to minimize this. I've got a sensor for my player. I'm going to add a sensor. And instead of adding a keyboard sensor, right, there's another one called collision. So let's add collision. So it's a collision type sensor. When I collide, and here's the key, guys. When I collide with an object that has a property of enemy, which I just set, my enemy property, right? Then, here's my if, then, or whatever. Then I want to add an actuator. Let's add an actuator. Then what do I want to do? I want to change my property, right? So if I click on the property actuator, I want to change my property. And what property is it? I want to change my player health property. And I can assign a value. There's different options here. Look at my pull down. I can assign, right? I can toggle, I can copy, or I can add. In this particular case, I want to add what? A -1. And if you add a -1, you're actually subtracting 1, right? That's what I'm doing over here. And now I've got to connect these two logic bricks to make it work. So here it is. So every time I hit my enemy, when I touch my enemy, I lose a health. Okay, let's test to see if this works. I'm going to press P for play. I've got my health on the top. I collide with my enemy, 9. Hey, look how big it is. Look how big I'm colliding way out here. How come? Look, I'm pushing it, but I'm way out here for collision, my collision. It's like my collision bounds are huge. I'm 2, I got 1 health, I got 0 health, I got -1 health. And if I keep pushing my object off, and it finally falls. How come it looks like that? How come it's like so big? Well, if you don't know what it is, escape. If I go to game, and if I go to show physics visualization, this is important too. Then when I press play, so show physics visualization, if I press play, then now you see how big my sphere is. Take a look. My sphere, my bounding box for my sphere is huge, right? For some bloody reason. Probably because I changed the units and I messed around with that. And that's why whenever I play, if I go in here, look what it's colliding with. If I want to debug, I can see where my bounding box is, right? Because my bounding box is what I'm colliding with, right? And I can turn physics visualization on and off. It's a very important thing, right? I just went right through it, look. All right. Right? There's my physics visualization. Okay, let's turn that back off. And let me go back into default view for my sphere. So here's my sphere, right? And I'm in physics. And my margin, right, is quite large, right? Sphere. Again, if I want to see my visualization, here it is. Now this is in game, so if I press P, there's how big my sphere is. It's massive, right? So how do I change that so it's smaller, right? Well, here's one thing. If I check this collision bounds off, look what happens. Nothing. It's still the same size, right? If I put collision bounds on and change it from sphere to cylinder, or cylinder, right? Look what it does. It actually shows me that my cylinder is hugging my sphere a little bit. If I go back from cylinder to sphere, right, it looks like it hugs it. When I press play, it's massive, right? Why? It's my margin, right? So if I go back, it's an important thing to understand how physics visualization works. If I increase my margin, if I go way higher, like up to 1, here's my 1, And if I go P for play, right, just notice my margin didn't really change anything. If I go like change my bounds, my margin to way down low, like 0.00000 something else, right? I go P for play, right? Still, it's pretty large, this bounding box. So where the hell is it housed? How come it's so darn huge? It's one thing we have to know. If I push this back to cube, if I go back to, like, so this is different ones, right? Triangle mesh is one. There's convex hull. Convex hull is the best one. It hugs your object. So if I go back to P, look at that. Now that's much better, right? From a margins perspective. It still hovers off the ground, right? Just the way I made it, but it's much closer to what it was. Some of it also is the way I've created my object, and I'll tell you this before I continue. I've transformed my object's location, but I've also transformed my object's scale. The scale of my object here is 3 times larger than what it should be, right? And that's what also drives the size of this stuff here. So, very, very important thing to do. If you're making an object, like for example, if you have a character or an enemy, if we import a spaceship, I'm going to show you guys how to do actual objects from somewhere else, because let's face it, our modeling days are pretty much done for this course, right? We want to try and import objects now from now on. We'll do some modeling as well for architecture and that kind of thing, but more or less, it's, you know, I'm not going to go into too much detail about modeling. You guys know how to do basic modeling now, right? But if you notice, I've transformed my object. My scale is 3 times larger than it should be. Well, that affects how my object works. Let me explain this. So I still got my material. Right, here's my material. I've got my material. I'm going to rename this red. I don't have to get rid of it, and it never goes away. Even if I delete my object, my sphere. So I'm deleting my sphere now. Let's get rid of it. One thing I'm going to lose my property, but I'm going to get back. I can add that in very easily. So here's I delete my sphere. I'm going to add a new sphere in. Let's add it in. So Shift A. Here's my mesh. Here's my UV sphere, right? And if you notice, my scale is 1, right? If I go back to physics now and go to dynamic object without adding any kind of material, right? My scale is dynamic. I add collision bounds. I make it a sphere, right? And I play. It's good, right? Why? Because my scale is only 1, right? It's not like huge, massive. So how do I modify this? If I want to scale this up, do I scale it in object mode? The answer is no, man. You scale everything in edit mode, right? And that way it keeps everything in object mode as 1. Not, my dimensions are still actually quite small, 0.6. My scale is 1. I can also lock the scaling of my object here. If I go lock, if I lock everything, and even if I press scale, and I kind of drag it all over the place, it won't change anything, because I can lock my object up. But that doesn't make any sense. But if I press edit, and if I go to this, and if I scale it up this way, right, like what we normally do, right, so I'm going to scale it up so it's much larger. Here's my enemy now, right, much larger enemy, right, and I'm going to move this up, right. Now if you notice, my origin is still linked to my object, but I'm moving it around now in space. This is bad, right? And if I move my object around in edit mode, guess what happens? My origin doesn't move. My origin stays where it was. No, watch. If I go back, my origin's way down here still. So I got to reset my origin. I got to set my origin back to geometry. Now it's there. Now if you notice, my object is still only 1 scale. So if I go to physics visualization, right? If you notice, see how small it is. I've scaled it up beyond the size of my object, which is kind of weird too. Take a look, right? I've scaled it up, but when I go to my margin for my boundaries, it shows you how big my bounding box is, and it's quite small, right? If I go back to box view for a second, you can see that this is the box, right? But when I go back to bounding box, right, this is nice. It works okay with bounding box. If I change this to sphere, though, this is where it kind of gets weird. If I go here, you can see my bounding box is smaller than my sphere. So just FYI, I want to show you differences between one type of collision type and another. If I go back, the best one, of course, would be convex hull, but it takes up more CPU units. And if you notice, it actually allows you to move things around. Now take a look how it's green. And if I move my object in and I try and move my object around, so bumping into it, bumping into it, it's not moving. How come? It's not going anywhere. I can't affect it in any way, right? But even though my object is a dynamic object and it fell, you know, it won't move. Well, here's where I put no sleeping. I have to put no sleeping in here. That's one thing I do want to do for sure, right? So if I go P, it falls. Just can't move this thing around. How come? It's not moving. Well, look where it is. It's kind of sunken in there, right to the ground. Why? Because my ground has a bounding box. Let's turn this off now. Try this out. Ah, now that's different. Now it's layering on top of my ground, and I can actually, I think I've fallen off the edge. Let's try that again. If I go here now, I can't push from this side, but I can push it from, you know, if I'm careful enough, I can go in and push it, right? So I can apply force to it. Why? Because I've taken my collider away from my ground. I've got quite a bit of friction. I can turn my friction off again as well. But my collider is convex hull. Right? That's a trick too. Let's take this convex hull off and make it go back to a box. I go P. There's my box. Now I see I can't affect my object, can't push my object around, even though it's dynamic. If I make this rigid body though, make a rigid body, that's a different thing altogether. If I go P for play, rigid body, now, you know what, I'm imparting force to it, right? I'm imparting force to it to try and move it around. It's not a lot, right? And remember, my gravity is 30, right? Which is important as well. My mass is 1. It's as massive as this object. And that's what's pushing back. So both objects are equally massive, right? So, and there's quite a bit of friction. So it's stopping me from moving around. So if I want to make this a little less massive, I can move this back down the scale. Let's say I might make it like half as massive as my object. If I move this down now, then now I can try and impart force on it to move it around, right? See, as I kind of collide with it, you can see it shows you the collision bounds. Here's the other reason why it's not moving. Do you see that there's a material applied to this thing? The answer is no. No material, no physics. Let's try this out. So I'm going to kind of go to the material, add a new material, or I can choose one that's already been created, the red material that I already had. And when I do that, I can see that I've got friction of 0.5, and I can change my elasticity, my damping, and my force. Let's see if I try that now, if it makes a difference, right? So again, I can try to jumble this around, right? How come it's not moving? I want to show you all these things so that when you see the negative effects. Okay, let's do it one more time. So I'm going to get rid of my object, delete it, add a new object. I'm going to add a sphere, a UV sphere. It adds it quite small, and the reason why is because my dimensions were all messed up. If I change these dimensions, it's going to change my scale. So for now, let's leave it as is. Right? I'm going to pull it up so we can see the object. It's quite small. That's my bullet. Right? I'm going to change I'm going to add my material, which is this red material. Right? I'm going to change the sphere, call it enemy. It's quite small right now. Right? And from a collision bounds perspective, I'm going to go to collision bounds and change it to sphere. If I press P for play, set my collision type, my body type to dynamic, and press P for play, it falls. It's got quite a big thing, and now, hey, how come I can't affect it? It won't allow me to affect it somehow, right? You guys have the same thing? So for this movie, I wanted to show you, I wanted to kind of review all that stuff again, right? Now remember, there's a couple things here. If I don't make this guy an actor, even though he's a character, here's another one. If I press play, and he's an actor now, I can see that every time he touches my sphere, right, he wakes it up. I'm waking it up, I'm interacting with it. There is a collision that's being detected. That's important. My jump is still there, right? My world force is pretty high though. I've turned my gravity pretty high to 30. If I go back down to 10, here's my 10, and I press play again, falls kind of slowly. It's a lot slower than normal. I still can't seem to push it around, right? Still using bullet physics, right? Which is a bit of an issue. What about if I change my motion type, right? So I go back to game view, right? And if I have different motion types here, I'll adjust my properties in a second so it works with my enemy. But if I go to left, right, forward, back, and if I press play here again, and if you notice there's this bar that goes across. See this bar kind of lands across here. If I clip it at a certain angle, it'll move it a little bit, but it's kind of locked into this view, right? What's causing it to do so? So, again, if I look at this thing from a physics perspective, I don't have a game property. I'm going to add another game property in here. I'm going to call this thing enemy. Remember we called this enemy so we can detect collisions. And I'm going to change this from an integer to or a float to a Boolean, turn it on, right? And now when I go back here, I can check to see that I have this collision detection here. I've got a collider that checks to see that it's colliding with an enemy, and when it does so, then it takes away from my health. So how does that work? If I press play, P for play, and if I touch it, every time I touch the sphere, my health drops by 1. And you can see how that's doing that. If I clip the sphere in a different way, oh, I can almost knock it off the thing, and I knock myself off too. But why? Why did it change from, I'm not able to move it around? Why? Again, my ground has no collision value. There's nothing on it at all. If I go back to my default view, here's my default view, and I want to go, kind of talk about this a couple more times with you guys. My gravity's 10, but if I go back to my physics, it's not an actor. I can turn my actor, I can make it an actor if I want to. I can also use collision bounds. That's a box, right? And if I press play, there's my ground, right? I still can't not do much with it, right, in terms of my collider, right? If I go click this, and instead of box for my character, I go to convex hull, a very specific one. It's kind of weird for why I would do that. And if I try and modify my sphere, I can move it from some angles, but unless I'm directly aligned to it, not others, it won't really move. It does detect collisions, but it won't move. It won't do anything with it when I do that. And it's not a glitch. It's the way I've made my settings. Okay, so here's my object. It's going to fall. So these are cool. This is how basic movement and everything works. And I wanted to do another kind of thing in terms of jumping. When I press P, and I can jump over my object. And that's why I kind of set my world physics to 30. If I go back to here and go gravity to 30, take a look at how that floated before. If I go back and press to P, falls much faster. That's how it should fall. Here's another thing. Here's physics steps. This is very interesting. Physics steps means if I hover over it, it says the maximum number of physics steps per game frame. If graphics slows down the game, higher value allows physics to keep up with the real-time stuff, right? And that's one. And the other one is substeps. Number of simulation substeps per physics time step. Higher value gives better physics precision. Also wears on your thing. These should be at least 5 for each of them, right? The higher value, if you notice, I can't go higher than 5. For the maximum steps, once I go maximum steps, I can go to 10 if I want, right? If I press this now again, it checks physics more often. So basically, as I connect, if I do a lot of collisions or whatever, it'll check my physics a lot more, right, than it would before. I can also modify the material for my world. So my friction is quite high. I can choose to undampen my friction. I can move friction right down low. Again, if I press P, and then that way, once it starts to roll something, it'll roll. To show you that, I can, we did it before, but I will rotate my entire plane across the x-axis 10 degrees. So you can see that there's a bit of a rotation now. And I'm just going to kind of drop my character in there too. So my character and my enemy drops. Press P for character. Now you see I start rolling, and so does my enemy. My enemy starts to roll down, and it goes away, right? Because there's no friction for my world. It'll keep rolling forever. It'll simulate that fall forever and ever. Okay, that's what that does. That friction stuff and elasticity. We tried that before from my world. I can increase my elasticity a lot. Let's go. If I went to 1 and I press P, then there's a bit of a bounce. If I really want to show a bounce, like I showed you last time with the ball, I would choose my elasticity way up on the ball texture as well. And now you're going to see a bit of a bounce on the ball. Right there it is as it bounces. Now I'm going to turn my physics visualization off for a second. So I'm just going to turn this off because it's a little bit annoying. And then let us make these a little bit smaller. I'll take away this property here so we can see it. And let's see this ball bounce again. So look, take a look at the ball bouncing. So it's going to bounce way over here, right? So let's try this again. So my ball bouncing, and it's going to keep bouncing forever. Now remember, if I Shift D to duplicate, right? Shift D, oops. Shift D to duplicate. That's cool. And I press play again. I'm going to have multiple balls bouncing all at the same time. This is cool. Let's straighten up my world again. Right, so I'm going to go N for transform. And instead of my rotation at 10, make it 0. So go back to normal. Now if I go P for a thing, it's going to continue to bounce. But you see how one and the other one eventually loses its momentum and stops. It's damping. Right, that's what's happening right now. And if I run over them, you see how they stop? It's almost like they've been instantly dampened. The way they've been, and they're stopping. You can see that I'm not quite touching them like I'd like to as they fall asleep. Okay. There is also a difference if I just undo, right, and I go back to this one and make this 0. There's also a difference. One thing I should mention is the difference between duplicating, like Shift D for duplicating, and then if I want to modify something, and it's something else called duplicate linked. You ever try this one? Try this duplicate linked. So here I am. I'm going to go, if I hover over duplicate linked, it says shortcut is Alt D. So if I click Alt D, right, and I go across the x-axis, right, now this is a different object. These two objects, anything I do to one object happens to the other one. Let's show you what I'm talking about here. If I scroll in, right, and if I go tab in, see how both of them are highlighted now? It's almost like mirroring, but I affect the entire object. Now, if I scale this thing up, so I go scale up, here's my scale, right, for both my objects, so it's quite big. Both objects scaled, right? If I go back to edit mode, right, as an example, or object mode, and I go back to play, right now, they're much larger objects. They fall much faster too, and I can't affect them again. Become obstacles for me. All right, so recap for this movie before I go into the next piece. 1. Logic bricks. We talked about them last time. I want to talk about this time. Again, a little bit of the same thing. Logic bricks are like programming, but not. You can add in logic bricks to detect things like if I'm getting hit by adding other properties. Properties are just, consider them like variables. If I look at it, logic, I'm showing you this again because I can't just show you one time and talk about logic bricks one time and think, hey, you guys can make a game now. It's not enough time, right? Here's my game view. So again, if I look at my logic bricks, I have properties like variables. I have different kinds of logic bricks. I can use different kinds of sensors. Here's a spacebar sensor. Here's key sensors. I can also do a collision sensor where I'm colliding with a type of object. I can detect when it's going to happen. And now whether I detect whether I have one object or the other, both of them, because I've duplicated them, both of them have the same properties. And this is the really cool thing about making one enemy and duplicating that enemy, because the other enemy has all the same properties as the previous enemy. So if you do a model or you import a model like a spaceship and you want your player to collide with it, right? then you want to be able to to set it up on one model and then duplicate it over and over again. Any changes I make to one model, when I do Alt D instead of Shift D, it duplicates it linked. So I make change to one, changes the other. That's an advantage. It's also a disadvantage. So be careful there. And you can unlink the models as well. Okay, so logic bricks. I've also talked about here different view modes. We've moved from my default mode to my game view mode, and those kind of things. And it's important for us to understand this. I'm going to teach you how to do stuff both in the 3D, make a 3D game, and how do we make a 2D game? Because you can make both 3D and 2D games in Blender, right? How do we do that? But first, you have to understand how to make things happen by using sensors, controllers, and actuators, which is what we've been doing for the last 2 weeks.